You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we have some chilling news here as it relates to further weaponization of the federal government against a political opponent of Donald Trump. Can you explain what just happened?
Yeah, Brian, this is not only weaponization of the federal government, the Department of Justice, but I don't think anybody can now dispute that the Department of Justice, Pam Bondi, and the United States attorneys that serve under her are Donald Trump's personal lawyers, because what they just did was the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District of New York issued a grand jury subpoena reportedly to Letitia James to explore whether Letitia James and her office violated Donald Trump's civil rights. I don't even know what they claim to base that on. I haven't seen anything more about sort of the motivation or the substance behind this grand jury subpoena, but apparently it has something to do with the successful lawsuit that Letitia James, as the Attorney General for the state of New York, brought against Donald Trump and his business and his two eldest sons, Don Jr. and Eric. And that was a civil suit for business fraud, some 10 years worth of horrific business fraud perpetrated by Trump and his sons. And he went to trial and he was found liable. And a judge imposed upwards of $450 million as a civil judgment for what the Judge Engoron, a New York State court judge, said was fraud perpetrated by Trump and his sons that, quote, shocks the conscience. But somehow, I guess the Department of Justice thinks that Donald Trump's civil rights were violated by Letitia James, holding him accountable for the fraud that he was found to have perpetrated in New York. And here's the thing, Brian, it feels to me like that trial, which took place while Donald Trump was a private citizen, you can't possibly say the Department of Justice can swoop in to represent what Donald Trump's interest in a time he was a private citizen. And that's why I opened with, it seems crystal clear, indisputable, that DOJ is now serving as the personal lawyers to Donald Trump, not serving the interests of the American people.
Okay, so this question is going to sound a little bit reductive, but does Letitia James have anything to worry about here from a legal standpoint?
Yeah, so I'm going to use a legal term. Hell no. And the reason I say that, Brian, is because, listen, as a 30-year federal prosecutor, I issued more grand jury subpoenas, more subpoenas on behalf of the grand jury, exercising the power of the grand jury than I could ever count. And here's the thing. We are very careful as federal prosecutors about making sure we are on the most solid footing, legally speaking, before we ever issue a grand jury subpoena to anybody, and certainly before we open a grand jury investigation into some person or some incident. And so I can't imagine, how the grand jury in the Northern District of New York has the authority, has the jurisdiction, has the lawful ability to issue a grand jury subpoena to the New York Attorney General, State Attorney General, for allegedly violating Donald Trump's civil rights. None of this makes any sense to me. So here's what I predict will be the first thing that lawyers on behalf of Letitia James or the Attorney General's office in New York will do. They will file what's called a motion to quash. Kind of sounds like a motion to squash the grand jury subpoena, which in substance is what it is. They will bring a motion to quash. In other words, to invalidate the subpoena because there was no lawful basis to issue it in the first place. And they will argue this is an abuse of the Department of Justice's responsibility to represent the interests of the American people, not the interests of a private citizen before he became president. They will raise a 10th Amendment challenge because this really is interfering with the state's right to conduct proceedings, criminal proceedings, civil proceedings, matters brought by the New York State attorney general. That is a power of a sovereign entity, the state of New York. So there will be all sorts of challenges, I suspect, brought against this subpoena. And this subpoena may go bye-bye, and that will show that there is yet another horrific abuse that's been perpetrated by Pam Bondi, by the Department of Justice, and by Donald Trump, who is, in a very real sense, it seems, in charge of the day-to-day operations of DOJ.
Okay, so the reason I asked that, now that we've come to an understanding that this is not a baseless investigation or prosecution into Letitia James, with that said, what could the DOJ still do, given the powers that it has to make Letitia James's life miserable right here? Because it's not like being able to wield the full force of the DOJ, even with a baseless investigation, even if it does get stopped by a judge, even if the subpoena is quashed, that still doesn't mean the DOJ won't be able to exert some type of pressure or cause some pain on Letitia James.
It depends. When you ask the question, what can Trump's DOJ do? Well, I think the threshold issue is, are we talking what can they do lawfully, or what can they do unlawfully, abusing the powers of the Department of Justice?
It's worth talking about both, because it's not like either one is off the table as far as Trump is concerned.
Yeah, what they can do lawfully is exactly nothing. I mean, if the New York State Attorney General's office is somehow violating federal law, well, they could certainly open a criminal investigation for violations of federal law. And let's face it, Brian, Donald Trump is forever, I believe, motivated by a desire to distract from the Trump-Epstein-Maxwell scandal. They are forever, announcing that they're going to open criminal investigations, the latest being Obama and his administration, Jack Smith. Recently, it was John Brennan. It was James Comey. These are all distractions. There are going to be no federal indictments of any of these people, but they announced the investigation in hoping that they will distract away from what's really going on. Donald Trump is drowning in the Epstein scandal, so they could do the same thing and say, well, we're going to criminally investigate Letitia James. I think Trump may have, raised the possibility of criminally pursuing Tish James previously. So they can't do much lawfully, but they can, listen, we now have a senator, and Senator John Cornyn, asking the FBI to arrest state legislators who committed no crimes. That would arguably be not just an abuse of the FBI's power, but it could be a criminal act, kidnapping. If you take somebody into custody, you seize them, you arrest them, but they committed no crime. So what could the Trump administration and the DOJ and the FBI do to Letitia James, if they continue not to care about the rule of law? Oh, there's a whole heck of a lot they could try to do.
Is there something that Letitia James should be especially worried about, given what we know about Trump?
I don't think worried about. I think, if anybody has continued to sort of saw the legal wood in front of her in an unflinching manner, not being scared one whit by Donald Trump's, bloviating and nonsense, it's Letitia James. She just continues. I mean, she's held him accountable for running a scam charity and a scam university and for engaging in business fraud. He's been successfully prosecuted by the state of New York, by Alvin Bragg, district attorney in Manhattan.
So then, with all of that, with all of that in mind, what is the point? Knowing that Trump doesn't have any legitimate legal avenues ahead of him, knowing that Tish James is not going to be intimidated, nor has she ever been intimidated. In fact, she's been the most forward-leaning state attorney general there is. And so what do you think the goal is for him? Why engage in this process? And by the way, use the limited resources of the DOJ that could go toward other stuff. I'm sure he has plenty of grifts that he would love to put the DOJ toward. But why use what limited resources they have to go after something that's doomed in the end?
He's flooding the zone with distractions. That is what he is forever doing. I think this has little to do with a desire that he's going to accomplish something that will negatively impact Letitia James. But what are we talking about? This outrageous subpoena of Letitia James, and we're not focusing at this moment, though we will be very soon, on the Trump-Epstein-Maxwell scandal that, has more legs than pretty much anything else, particularly in MAGA world and Republican circles. So we're going to hear more outrageous subpoenas tomorrow and the next day and the next day because he's trying to flood the zone with distractions. The good news, Brian, is a week ago we were talking about, oh my goodness, he's opening a criminal investigation into former special counsel Jack Smith, and that story, that distraction landed with a thud. So then he had to say, Obama's committed treason, I'm going to criminally investigate him. We're not even talking about that 48 hours later. Why? Because the distractions aren't working, but he's going to keep them up.
Are you suggesting that he isn't being honest when he says that he wants to go after Beyonce, Oprah, Al Sharpton, and Kamala Harris?
Yeah. Perish the thought that Donald Trump is not being honest. He has probably promised to prosecute, I don't know, 3 dozen, 4 dozen or more people, and exactly 0 of them, Brian, have been prosecuted. Shouldn't we add those data points up and conclude that Donald Trump is full of shit when he says he's going to prosecute his enemies?
All right, so let's finish off with this. Let me ask this. If Donald Trump tries to use the DOJ in its improper capacity to basically litigate some issue that Donald Trump had when he was a private citizen, and they go to court over this, and court rules that the DOJ is not allowed to represent Donald Trump here, is not allowed to act on his behalf because he was a private citizen, and they are not his, our Department of Justice is not his personal attorneys, his personal criminal defense attorneys. And so can that establish some type of a precedent that other courts can look to, other plaintiffs or defendants can look to when Donald Trump tries to do the same thing with them, when he tries to improperly wield the DOJ for his own personal use, his own personal defense?
Yeah, that would be what we call persuasive authority. That's a fancy term for, well, it's not exactly precedent that another court or another judge has to follow, but it's pretty dang persuasive because the same reasoning should apply in other circumstances if DOJ tries to sort of abuse its power and its authority on behalf of Donald Trump.
Okay, well, we will, of course, stay on top of this. If Trump does nothing, which is in large part, I think, what we expect, in very much the same way that we're probably not expecting any serious prosecutions against Obama or Kamala Harris or Oprah or Beyonce or Al Sharpton or any of the other people who he's promised to wage prosecutions against. If nothing happens, then of course that will be the end of the story. But if he does move forward, which of course, look, he did wage a $10 billion lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal, so it's not like he is known not to be litigious. But either way, we'll bring it to you. For those who are watching, if you'd like to follow along and support our work completely free, please make sure to subscribe to both of our YouTube channels. The links are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.